I wanted to tell you how much I adore Little Men. It really moved me greatly, and that it kind of reminds me of my own childhood in a lot of ways. I had a friendship back then that also ended quite abruptly, very much like the friendship that's in the movie. I'm curious to know what your own childhood was like, and whether any of the friendship that's portrayed in the film is in any way autobiographical.
Very much so. I mean, I think all of my films are very personal works. They're not strictly autobiographical, but I try to bring as much of my own experience into them as possible. And I grew up in Memphis in the 60s and 70s, and so I was, when I was these kids' age, I was in Memphis, and I had a best friend who was from a very different part of the city, different background. He was one of two black kids in my class of about 20 students in a private elementary school, and we were extremely close, and we were best friends, and our friendship had a different path than the one in the films, but I think I was interested in how children are able to cross difference in friendships in a way that is much more difficult for adults. I think adults tend to stay in their own corners.
Mm. And that's kind of portrayed in the film too, in the relationship between Paulina Garcia, who plays the shop owner. She has a shop that is really owned by Greg Kinnear, and it's very much a film about class differences as well. Would you agree?
I do. I mean, I think I've made 6 features, and you could, in a way, describe them as all being about the role of money and class, more specifically, in how we live our lives and the options and opportunities that we have, and how class distinctions are often what keeps people apart, though and sometimes it's also what makes people more interested in each other. So I think the questions, I mean, in that way, I think the film speaks to a lot of very timely issues in our country. Why do people make choices that they make? Why do people vote the way they vote? What are they not feeling like they have, and what are they seeing other people who have differently? What are the moral decisions we make that are compelled by our economic situation? All these questions are, I think, at the heart of the film.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for instance, Greg Kinnear, who, while being rather self-absorbed in his own way, he's not a villain, because he's kind of caught between doing the right thing by his family and then doing sort of the wrong thing by in a way inadvertently kind of victimizing this shop owner who's unable to pay the higher rents that he's requiring.
I think when we set out to write the film, Mauricio Zacharias, my co-writer, and I were intentionally making it so you couldn't decide who was the villain and who was the victim. That in a way, both families are sort of fighting for the middle class in a way. They're fighting for what they need. Greg Kinnear and Jennifer Ely, who play the landlord, are not super rich. And Paulina Garcia, who plays the immigrant from Chile, she's not just off the boat. They have very similar education class. There's a way in which they're right somewhere in the middle. And I think that makes for more tension in the film, because you empathize with both sides.
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the things that makes it great. Of course, the 2 lead characters are played by newcomers, Theo Taplitz and Michael Barbieri. I want to know what the audition process was like, and how you found those 2 just extraordinary actors.
Yeah, I was lucky. I knew I couldn't make the film without 2 great kids. these boys had never been in movies, but they've both been interested in acting for quite a while, for 13-year-old kids. Theo, we found through his agent. He'd never been in a movie, but he seemed to have an agent. And I work with a casting director named Avi Kaufman, and Avi has done a lot of kids casting.
Yeah.
She cast the kid in The Sixth Sense. She cast the kid in Searching for Bobby Fischer. She cast the kid in Life of Pi. So she's got a really
famous
good
in her
eye.
field.
Theo came. Yeah, she is. She's the best. And Theo put himself on tape. Actually, he lives in Los Angeles, so he read a scene for the film. And when I saw it, it was like watching a documentary of this kid I'd written. It was so authentic and natural, and there was he was everything that I imagined, and only more specific. And Michael came through an open call in New York. We put up signs all over, including at the Lee Strasberg Institute, a theater school that's kind of the birth of method acting. And Michael had been studying there, and he came in from an open call. And as soon as he walked in, he was wearing these very thick kind of glasses. And I said, "Take your glasses off." And he started reading, and I just had never seen a kid who was so much a New Yorker. You really just felt the history in his accent, and he was so charismatic, and I cast him very quickly. The acting teacher in the film, there's a scene where he's in an acting class, is actually Michael's real life acting teacher, Mauricio Bustamante, who taught him at Lee Strasberg.
Okay, so that's where that scene came from. That's one of my favorite scenes in the movie because it's just it feels so visceral. It feels it just injects so much life into the film. I have to say, with Michael Barbieri, he reminds me of like a young Matt Dillon or something like that. Like he's got that same. He's got that same sort of, just grab the film, grab you by the throat kind of quality that Matt Dillon had in his first movie, Over the Edge. So that's just a little side note
Good
for
comparison.
me. But,
well, I was just going to tell you two things about Michael. Since we finished the film, he's already been cast in the next Matthew McConaughey film, The Dark Tower. He's also got a part in Spider-Man, which they shot in Atlanta. So he's had a really good year since the film premiered at Sundance. But even better than that, and you'll understand why this is exciting for me, Michael was accepted this summer to the LaGuardia High School for Performing Arts, and he's a freshman at the school now.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I mean, that's where he wants to go in the film, right?
They'll understand. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's fantastic. The film is also about sort of the changing face of Brooklyn, because it takes place in a part of Brooklyn that's becoming, as I say, more bohemian earlier on in the film, and but this business that Paulina Garcia has is not really keeping up with the times. Do you feel like New York is changing in a way that sort of? I mean, I'm a former New Yorker too. I've lived up there for 10 years, both in Manhattan and in Brooklyn. And do you feel like New York is changing for the better or for the worse? I often feel like it's going in places that I don't really recognize New York anymore. In a way.
I'm not. I try not to be nostalgic as a person. I really try to be, particularly as a film director. I try not to cherish, the things that was. At the same time, because I feel like that's not my job. Really, my job is to be attentive to how things move, how things are different. And I think what's happening in New York, I've shown the film in many different cities. I think almost any block of any city you could look at and watch and notice the way change affects individuals. And that's really what I'm trying to do as a storyteller. So yes, I think as if I was wearing my political hat, I can observe changes and how laws have affected cities, and what buildings go up and what buildings go down, and I can have strong opinions. As a filmmaker, I'm trying to, in a way, be more objective, to be observant, but also to understand how that change affects individual lives. That's where the drama is.
One of the scenes, another movie that this reminds me of, although it's a older film from the film reminds me of films from the 80s, in particular like a movie called Old Enough, which is by Marissa Silver, Joan Micklin Silver's daughter. I think it's her only movie, and that's a movie about female friendships as opposed to male ones.
I've never seen that movie.
You should watch it. It's really good. I think it might be a little hard to come by. Although I think it did get a digital release recently, so you should try and search it out. It's quite good. I was wondering if
Oh, it sounds great.
I was wondering some of your influences. I mean, I've been a fan of your work since 40 Shades of Blue, but I'm curious to know like some of the movies that you love, or some of the filmmakers you love.
Yeah. Well, for this film, I think one film that was really inspiring was The World of Henry Orient by George Roy Hill, which, if you haven't, I'll pick up Old Enough and you find The World of Henry Orient if you haven't seen it.
Oh, I've seen The World of Henry Orient.
It's a great film about...
Yeah.
Oh, you have? Yeah, I love that film. And I think, how the film dealt with children in New York, and that kind of very serious movie about the joys and sorrows of being young, that are both, that has the lightness of that. For me, numerous filmmakers have been important, but I think that I've been particularly influenced by French cinema over the last 40 years. So one of my sort of heroes, and probably the most significant one for me, is Maurice Pialat, who I think of as the Cassavetes of France, because he's been so influential to everyone who came after him. And I'm always watching his films and showing them to my cinematographers. For this film, he made a movie called À nos amours with Sandrine Bonnaire, and that film was one that my cinematographer and I looked at very, very closely. Ken Loach has been a big influence on me. Jean Eustache, who made a film called My Little Loves, which is another film about childhood, was a very important filmmaker to me. Bresson. I guess I like people who are, in their work, very attentive to the momentary details of life that the camera can capture. That the camera is a tool of observation and empathy.
Yeah. As I've always said that that movies are kind of like machines to create to help you feel emotions that you wouldn't normally be feeling at that one moment. So, that's one of the things I think your movies do.
Thank you. I think what I hope is that my films give you access to the intimate interior qualities and conflicts in people's lives in a way that is personally resonant. So I think often my films begin in a world that is kind of unknown to the audience, and then slowly that world becomes revealed. And if the film works, and I think this is what happens in Little Men, is that by the end of the film you feel really close to the five central characters. That somehow they seem like people you've known all your life.
That's so true. You mentioned The World of Henry Orient, and another one of my favorite films is A Little Romance, which is also done by George Roy Hill. Have you ever seen that?
I'm gonna admit, I remember when Diane Lane was on the cover of Time magazine, but I've never seen the movie. I gotta write myself a list because I have 4-year-old. I have 4-year-old kids, and I'm introducing them to movies, and both of these I'm going to add to our list. They might need to wait till they're 6 to see A Little Romance, but
Maybe. I mean, it's a wonderfully gentle movie. I think it's the best movie about romance. Period. Just adult or childhood romances, but it's one that never fails to reduce me to tears. One of the things,
I can't wait.
You're gonna love it. You're gonna love it. But you mentioned World of Henry Orient, and that has a lot of wonderful scenes with just the two girls running through, creating havoc throughout the city, and just running through it and having fun and everything. And that touches on one of my favorite features of Little Men is those wonderful scenes with the two boys skating through the city. Can you talk about the experience of filming some of that?
Well, I think I really wanted the film to have the cinematic equivalent of childhood joy. And so I was very conscious of using both the image. Those are the kind of the scenes in the film where you see the most movement. A lot of the adult scenes in the film are very static and still. There's a claustrophobic feeling when adults get together. And I wanted you to feel the kind of freedom of being young. And to do that, I was also interested in using a typical film, a sort of classic film score. And I worked with the composer Dickon Hinchliffe, who I've made 2 films with, and he really understood that quality. So the music, I think, is really key in that moment. And the music, to me, is both very innocent, but it's also quite sophisticated. There's it manages to be both complex and simple. And I that was some element that I think was very important to those scenes.
I love the score. The score adds such a just kind of a liveliness to the movie that is not. I mean, I don't feel that in a lot of present day indie movies. So I was happy to have that score to sort of. I don't know. I don't know. It just puts sound to the emotion of the film, and I love it. I'm wondering.
Well, I like musical scores that exist. They both are part of the movie, and they also exist on a separate plane. But they're not written just to elaborate on the emotions. But they work both sort of like counterpuntal and separate, if that makes sense. So there's like 2 lines of thought. Godard talked about music as sound plus image. You have to think of them as 2 different elements that somehow speak together.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if you have a kind of you and your co-writer on this project, but just in general, if you have a sort of a technique for writing the kind of dialogue, the kind of perfect dialogue that avoids any kind of movie kind of cliche movie kind of spin. I mean, do you have any kind of techniques? Do you read your dialogue back, or do you go through rehearsals and change things, or how does that work?
Well, I guess a lot of different ways. I mean, I don't rehearse at all. So I work with my actors individually. We talk. So I'll meet with Greg Kinnear or Michael Barbieri or one of the actors from the film for many hours, and we'll talk through the script, but we'll never read the dialogue. And I won't meet with 2 actors at the same time. I never want them to hear another actor saying a line before we start shooting. I do no formal rehearsals because I think it allows for the shooting to actually be the process of rehearsing and changing and discovery. And I'd rather the actor not fix their idea of how they're going to respond, because they lose something in making those decisions in advance. I also, with dialogue, I try to avoid any time where you sense that the writer is sort of pointing at something. I'd like things to be more almost a series of tangential associations, and that they play against and on top of each other. And so if ever I feel the dialogue is too directed to kind of reveal meaning, then I try to get rid of it. And I also try to use silence as a way of communicating, silence being one of the more profound things that cinema can convey, because the camera can be present while there are no words.
Mm-hmm. I love how your shots are very composed. There's no handheld work involved. Handheld camera work, unless it's done extremely well by someone who's an expert behind the camera. I just find that handheld camera work is sort of a pet peeve of mine, because a lot of people can't do it. So that's another thing that pleases me about your films, is that they're very composed shots. Usually the camera is on sticks or anything. But do you ever have a kind of is handheld work? Do you think is it used as sort of a crutch by some filmmakers, or is it something that you try to avoid?
Well, I mean, anything can be used badly, so I don't think it's inherently to handheld and non-handheld. For me, there's an artificial quality when I seem to use handheld to using it as a kind of attempt to be closer and more real. I find that the distance and the kind of stillness that putting things on sticks can provide allows the actors to be really what's most prominent. I've tried handheld on a couple of scenes in my films, and I'm always uncomfortable with it. It just doesn't really work for me.
I'm interested. Were there any particular challenges in directing? Because this is the first film that I've seen of yours. There's a few that I've missed, but this is the first film that I've seen of yours that has a large young cast this young. Did you find any challenges in directing the kids, or did you feel like they just grabbed the opportunity and
no? I
ran
mean,
with it?
I cast those kids. Once I had these kids, they were as good as any actor I've ever worked with. I never assume I'm going to teach anyone anything before we start shooting, so they have to be kind of ready, camera ready, I would say. I think the challenges of this film had to do with it's a very delicate story. It's minimal in some ways, so getting the kind of suspension, tension, and the power of the film took a certain amount of rigor, particularly in the editing process, I think. To kind of what happens, I think, is when people watch the film, it's quite suspenseful, but it happens unexpectedly, and finding that suspense had a lot to do with pace and rhythm, and I guess that was maybe one of the more challenging or demanding aspects of the film.
Well, I know you. I wanted to congratulate you on your Indie Spirit nomination for screenplay, and also for Paulina Garcia, who's just great in the movie, as is Greg Kinnear, the whole cast, of course. I noticed that on IMDb that you've got a TV series in development. Can you talk about that? Yeah, I'm working on a miniseries, also writing with Mauricio Zacharias again, set in New York. It's based on a book called Cristadora, which is set in an apartment building in the East Village of New York called the Cristadora, and it's a multiple character story that covers many years in New York, from the 80s to the present. And so it covers the time of the worst time of AIDS, a lot of periods of AIDS activism, but also just life as an artist in New York. It's someone said it was a bonfire for the vanity and the age of AIDS. So it's a very dramatic film with lots of different drama and melodrama, and it's again about family, which is probably the things that are most interesting to me, but really situated in New York during those years. It's a great book. I recommend it. It's by a writer named Tim Murphy. I'm finding that I'm seeing that a lot of filmmakers are gravitating towards television right now. Is there? I mean, I'm thinking that it's becoming just ridiculously difficult to get a film financed, and so and maybe the audiences for smarter filmmakers are gravitating towards television now. Do you feel similarly?
Well, it's a similar issue to the one in the film, which is you have a woman, Paulina Garcia, owns a shop which isn't really able to maintain its economic meaning. The question is the shop still valuable even if it can't pay the rent? I would say that independent film, I'm lucky enough to be able and fortunate enough to have found financiers and individuals who are help make my films possible, and I am able to make feature films. That said, there's very limited capital, and there's in television you can actually be hired to write, which is something I've never had in the feature world. And so there's the attraction of that relationship to capitalism and to being paid and all these things. So I think it's a very different medium. I don't think it can be, I don't think that television is particularly not the same as an art film. Art films have a certain amount of ambiguity, and they have the potential for different kinds of experimentation. There's the potential for silence, all these things that are harder in the narrative TV form. And by the way, television is corporate just by nature. It's not independent, so you have different demands. So I guess I'm recognizing those differences and trying to balance my opportunities and my creative work.
My co-host, Jamie Duvall, who you've talked to, I think in connection with Married Life, seemed to have some memory of you in that interview talking about possibly doing a Manson-related, Charles Manson related piece. Is this the case? I mean,
well, I wrote a script with Oren Moverman, and I wrote a script based on the work of Gavin Lambert, who was a British writer who lived in LA in the 1960s. And we wrote a film script that we never were able to get made. We finished the script in 2008, which was kind of the worst time to try to get a period. Well, it was the worst time to try for independent film. There was no money.
It was a bad time for us all,
as we all know. Exactly. It was just a bad, and so I kind of had to regroup, and that film has not yet been made, but we have a great script. I would have to find my way back to that time in a way, and that's something that I might do.